So earlier this week, I was browsing the Stellaris subreddit, and my eye came across the following video. The Stellaris Combat Theory of version 2.0 carrier operations, which was uploaded on the 26th of February by Law1 Gaming, a YouTube channel that actually turns out to have a lot of very interesting information on it when it comes to the mechanics of the game. Basically, the Law 1 Gaming channel looks at a mechanic in game and runs the numbers to see whether or not it is interesting or not. And one thing in particular came up in this video, and that was what I like to describe as a deadly joke weapon, which is the Amoeba Strikecraft. Now, in Law 1's video, and I highly recommend you go and subscribe to his channel because he goes a little bit deeper into it, he basically says Amoeba are amazing. And, well, whether or not you always want to go and believe one video, which is fine, I decided to rerun the numbers to basically peer review the information that was given to me just to see if he was correct or not. So let's run the numbers, shall we? So, let's talk about some numbers. First of all, we need to identify what is interesting to this discussion and what is not. Now, first of all, we need to identify which are the standard strikecraft that you can research through normal ways. Those are, of course, the Scout Fighters, the Tier 1 to Tier 2 and Tier 3 strike craft. Then we have the non-standard variants, which is the Amoeba and the Scourge. Now, the Scourge, we're going to leave out of this discussion because it's highly unlikely that you're going to get it because they very rarely spawn, and even then, they are not really that good. And then we have two more which are non-playables, which is the Mining Drone from the Resource Gathering Drones, and the Contingency, which has its own bomber type, which is pretty crazy if you look at its HP, but you can't play with it, so that's a bit of a shame. Now, obviously, we're going to be focusing a little bit on the Amoeba. Now, Tier 1 Strikecraft until Tier 3 Strikecraft have their following damage modifiers. A Tier 1 Strikecraft does between 2 and 8 damage within the context of the game, which by itself is by far the worst one when it comes to the bomber types. For the sake of talking about bomber types, we're going to ignore the fighters for this one. Tier 2 does 4 to 9, Tier 3 does 6 to 12, and Amoeba does an absolutely insane 16 to 26 damage. That is certifiably insane how much damage those Amoeba bombers do. And it's kind of interesting, really, because you don't really think about it. The Amoeba, you can kill them, you can research their flagella strikecraft and whatnot, but you never really use them because it doesn't seem to be interesting. Turns out that they are the most powerful individual bombers in the game. Let's move on. So they have a damage cooldown of 5, whereas all the other ones have 2. That means that they will only shoot twice less than the other strike craft, which is fine. They spawn with 8 craft, just like the others, and just doing a little bit of math here means that the damage output for the Amoeba is just below the Tier 3 strike craft. What is fascinating, really, considering Tier 3 strike craft are fairly late in the game. That means that on paper, the Amoeba are potentially some of the strongest fighters within the game, and you can get them very early on. Like, on paper, they completely outclass Tier 1, they completely outclass Tier 3, and maybe even Tier 2, and maybe even Tier 3. Maybe. But that's something that we'll need to take a look at. In terms of hull, armor, and shields, the Tier 3 Strikecraft is by far the best, having a total of 75, but that can be bypassed through various weapons, obviously. The Amoeba sits at 50, slightly below the Tier 2, but still well above the Tier 1. When it comes to things like our accuracy, tracking, evasion, damage penetration, it's very similar to all the other ones, even though the accuracy, tracking, evasion for the Amoeba is significantly less than, say, even the Tier 1 Strikecraft. So we're going to need to take a look at basically what sort of results. We need to throw this into the mixer. Right now, I'm saying that the Amoeba should be able to compete with the Tier 2 Strikecraft until the late game, and then maybe being replaced by Tier 3. So let's take a look at that and see what happens. So I've set up a series of designs. They're all based on battleships. Now these are completely naked with just the strike craft and the Amoeba present. That basically means that these sort of tests are going to be happening within a vacuum. There is not going to be any ancillary stuff. No point defense, no aura effects, no nothing. And on top of that, all of the stuff is running at endgame. So we got 0 point power, we got hyper shields, neutronium power armor, as well as the auxiliary fire control computers. So let's take a look on how this is going to go. Overall, it's actually kind of interesting what happens here, because every single time we run this simulation, we kind of get into some very interesting results, and that is that it appears that the sheer amount of damage that the Amoeba generate actually managed to crush the tier 3 fighters every single time, or at least the battleship holding those tier 3 fighters. It's rather interesting to see how Amoeba are so good versus these guys, and yeah, we'll need to put some more testing on this. Let's take a look at how this will go if we put, say, point defense as well as some weapons on our strike craft, or at least our battleships, and see if we are running into a similar situation. Because I'm under the impression that the cooldown may have a little bit of an impact here, whereas the strike craft may be able to put down a lot of damage in general very quickly, but the Amoeba are still doing more damage overall. So if we add point defense to the ships, maybe we'll see something along the lines of the point defense destroying the strike craft, and then their native weapons doing more damage. Let's take a look at that, shall we? So as we are running our tests, we're seeing similar things as we saw the last time. However, the point defense is taking out the strike craft relatively quickly. Now the real question is, what sort of impact is the strike craft having on these sort of environments that are a little bit more realistic than the ones that play inside of a vacuum? Let's say that this is a mono-on-mono fleet sort of action. Well, as we can see, a lot of the strike craft get taken out very quickly, but at initial strike of the craft themselves are doing a significant amount of damage. However, we're seeing very different results than we saw the last time. Almost like a 50-50 sort of result towards, well, obviously neither, as both Amoeba and strike craft seem to be winning out in about 50% of the time, which makes me wonder if tier 3 is maybe a little bit much for Amoeba. The numbers do kind of lean in that general direction. So what would happen if we slap a tier 2 on there? So I've done the following. I've replaced the tier 3 strike craft with tier 2s, which by themselves are obviously a little bit weaker by a good 50% comparatively to the tier 3s. So let's take a look at how the Amoebas perform this time around. Are they stronger than the tier 2 strike craft? The theory says yes, and our simulations prove this as well. I ran this simulation about 10 to 20 times, and basically what I found is that the Amoeba win 8 out of 10 times in this particular situation, which is still not perfect, it's still not optimal, but it still kind of means that why would you ever use tier 1 or tier 2 strike craft if Amoeba, which can be gained relatively early in the game, are just absolutely incredible? Now the real question here is, are strike craft in general good? And that is a very difficult one to ask, because at the moment I've not ran any simulations with the 2.0 designs, whether or not we've got any optimal designs and whatnot, but still, it's still a question that should be asked. Are carriers back in 2.0? And more importantly, are we talking Amoeba carriers in 2.0, at least until the mid-game, until tier 3 strike craft show up? That is a question we're going to ask ourselves the next time, because, well, I would really like to see some carriers on the field. Now, a lot of this information was based on some research made by a YouTube channel called Lon Wan Gaming. Make sure you check his stuff out. I've got his link in the description below. Give it a subscribe as well, because a lot of the information that he gives out is very interesting, and the math goes a little bit deeper there as well. I don't necessarily always agree with his conclusions, but still, I think he has some very interesting info to give. Consider this particular video a peer review based on his content, and I hope that you liked it indeed. If you did so, then give it a like and maybe even a subscribe. We're going to go and dive more deeper into the mechanics of strike weapons, as well as maybe some others in the near future. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, take good care of yourselves as well as each other.